welcome to a special edition of the Convex Conversation with me, broadcaster Helen. Later this week, Britain will mark the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings, paying tribute to those who served in the Normandy campaign. For this week's episode, I've joined the paddle group Royal Marines Association and just paddled the tidal section of the Thames in a two-man folding boat known as a Klepper, made famous by the Cockleshell heroes. The group is in London re-enacting placing limpet mines on German shipping, represented in this commemorative event by HMS Belfast, which played a critical role in 1944. HMS Belfast fired her guns in support of Allied troops ashore, and the naval warship was where Winston Churchill planned to observe the landings from until King George VI insisted the Prime Minister back down. Today also marks the official launch of the Royal Marines Association Paddle Group's Channel Crossing. In a few hours, 18 veterans and serving Royal Marines commandos are setting out to sea on a 24-hour or so expedition to the Allied beaches, codenamed in World War II Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno and Sword, and they plan to recreate 47 Commandos' infamous landings. I'm out of my cagoule now. I'm trying to steal it actually because it's really nice, and on board HMS Belfast to talk to three of the team, starting with Chris Maynard, who I've just had the privilege of paddling with. Chris, that was a really wonderful experience and I felt in such safe hands given your background in the boat service. Just explain a little bit about what we did out there this morning on the Thames.
Yeah, today's little event was just a precursor to the D-Day paddle that we're going to do. You just mentioned the cross-channel paddle with the beachhead landings. The reason we're at HMS Belfast today is a triple sort of attack onto the next event. So HMS Belfast being very significant to D-Day. Obviously the D-Day landings itself, which we're doing the paddle for, and then the Cockleshell heroes, which we're going to go out very soon and place the limpet mines on the hull of HMS Belfast for. So that's sort of the tri aspect of today's event. In a few hours' time, we're going to jump back in the Kleppers and we'll get rigged up and then we'll paddle the limpet mines on the hull, reenacting what the Cockleshell heroes did in Bordeaux in 1942.
That's fantastic. Tell me as well a little about the boat, because we were in a proper Klepper, weren't we, when we were out on the Thames a few minutes ago?
Yeah, so it's called the Klepper Ares. It is still used within the sort of Special Forces arena in the UK Special Forces and sort of globally within the Special Forces environment. We've decided to use that boat within the paddle group because of its robustness. It is a fantastic boat. It's very stable in high sea conditions and you can put a lot of kit in there, so you can go for like prolonged periods of time out in the wilderness, sort of self-sustained with two of you. You can also collapse it down and carry it. So it doesn't mean you have to be waterlocked on every route that you do. You can finish a waterlocked route, pack it down, carry it over a mountain, and then continue your water expedition or operation, so to speak. So it's a fantastic boat to get a lot of stuff done.
What's ahead for you when you get to Normandy?
So after the cross-channel paddle, which should take about between sort of 26 to 28 hours, we will land in Port-en-Besson, which 47 Commando raided and took from the Nazis on the 7th of June. After we land in Port-en-Besson, I believe on the 5th of June, we will be paddling the US sector, so the Omaha and Utah beachheads, and also Pointe du Hoc. And then on the 6th of June, we hope to paddle Gold, Juno, and then finish up supporting 47 Commando with a landing on Sword Beach.
How much does it mean to you to be retracing their paddling and footsteps from D-Day?
It means so much. It's a phenomenal event. It's an extraordinary event. I feel massively humble and very proud and privileged to be able to paddle military Kleppers with my brothers onto those beachheads, to the point where I almost feel like I'm taking a little bit of a liberty. I'm paddling in the wakes of giants who landed on them beaches in 1944 on the 6th of June. So yeah, it's a great opportunity for us to pay our respects to the guys who fought for our freedom.
You served nearly 15 years. Why, in some ways, do you feel perhaps not good enough to do those landings?
I don't know. I think it's one of the commando spirits that we behold is unselfishness. We always try and hold others and build others around us, and we never look at ourselves as a sort of higher element in the teams that we operate. So those who have gone before us, we tip our caps to the past and the present. And I think it's about the great leadership aspect of who we are and what we do as commandos is respect each other's efforts. We're always trying to outdo each other, which I think makes us pretty good in the military world as well.
You worked on all kinds of covert operations, terror operations throughout your career. Some exciting stuff, I would imagine, some frightening stuff. But what effect did leaving the Corps after nearly 15 years have on you, Chris? Because to me, it feels as though the Marines are a real family and part of life.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for all of the operations that I conducted whilst I was serving, none of them have really affected me in any way, shape or form. The biggest thing that's had a massive impact on my life is separating from that family, from that brotherhood. I lived with people for 15 years who knew every single emotion I carried, and when you do that and you operate in harsh environments with those kind of people. I mean, you live every spectrum of the stress curve, from boredom all the way up to flight and flight, and they know every single aspect of you. To step away from people who know you that intimately, it's a damaging thing, and you step into the civilian world where you just automatically expect that people are going to treat you and behave the same around you, and they don't. And you have to become this actor. I feel like I live in no man's land where I can't go forward or back. So I don't see myself as a bootneck anymore, and I don't see myself as a civilian. So I find myself acting between the two worlds. And what the paddle group does is it allows me those small windows of opportunity where I can step back into adverse environments and be myself, where people respect that. They appreciate it. I need their help to get me through these expeditions, but they also need mine. So we become that family again for a small window of time. And that gives me that green reset that I need to keep my mental health in shape.
Just explain how the paddle group has done that kind of thing for lots of your colleagues, because when I was out there, I felt very privileged, Chris, to be out there with you on the Thames this morning. I could almost feel getting into the Klepper and feeling the waves in the Thames, almost a sense of calm came over me. And instantly, I felt part of your team. We were shouting to Lee on the other Klepper, and Mike and Brucey and Nutty, who I've featured before on the podcast. And that's just me stepping in as an outsider. So what does it bring to other people like you?
It's a shelter. It's a massive shelter from the storm that, veterans and serving guys live day to day. You end up going on these expeditions with a paddle group, and as soon as you're in the Klepper and you set off with the instruction from guys like Lee, who do the training weekends, and Joe, it's almost like going into what we would call a contact. You know what everyone in the team is going to do. You know what their strengths are. You know where their weaknesses are. You know who's the funny guy in the group. You know who's the serious guy in the group. And you just become that family. And I think anybody stepping in from the outside and taking a seat in them Kleppers would almost feel automatically part of the family because of the closeness that we have, that close-knit sort of camaraderie that we have within the group. So what it does for bootnecks and sort of veteran commandos, it just really provides that shelter. It takes them from struggles they might be having in life, regardless of what it is, and it puts them back into an austere environment where they don't have the opportunity to dwell on them problems in life. They have to focus on the then and now. The conscious mind is looking at every single aspect, looking at their brothers, reading the environment, reading the water, putting effort in to make the kayak go forward with their partner, staying in sync, steering the boat. There's so many aspects that takes your mind away from reality or normal life, should I say. It creates that window of opportunity where you can belong to part of that family again, where you feel needed and you need the guys to help you get through. So it provides a shelter, a sort of umbrella from a storm, if that makes sense. It
absolutely makes sense. And a place really where you can take care of your mental health, because people look at you, you're the tough guys, you're the Royal Marine Commandos, and perhaps people don't expect those more vulnerable emotions to exist, but they're bound to, given the horrors that you've seen and the dangerous missions you've been on.
One of my biggest struggles in life is my daughter, Alice, who was diagnosed at 4 years of age with spinal muscular atrophy. She occupies my mind every minute of every day. So going away on these expeditions offers me a little window of opportunity where I don't have the time to think about her. And as bad as that may sound, I do need it. I need that mental break from worry and being upset at the situation that my family finds ourselves in, So I go away on these expeditions. It puts me back in with my family, a different family who know me a hell of a lot better than my own family. It just gives me the reset. And I go back home a new man. That feeling, that achievement lasts months until the next expedition comes up and we go and hurt ourselves again.
Oh, well, that's important for your daughter as well, that when you go back and you've had your green reset, you're feeling strong and ready to go. You've got a few quotes and mantras to keep you going crossing the channel. What's the latest mantra for your team?
So I think Churchill had a really good one. If you're going through hell, keep going. We've paddleized it, we've paddle grouped it and recoined that phrase, should I say.
So what's the phrase now?
So it's, if you're going through hell, keep paddling. Yeah. So the first sort of 26 to 20 hours is going to be tough. It is going to take a bit of the toll on our bodies, and we're going to be a little bit of sleep deprivation, not much. We're used to going days without sleep, so that's not a problem. But a lot of the boats we have, some of them are 30 years old, 20 years old, 10 years old. They're all broken boats. We have to put a lot of time and effort into them to keep them maintained and sort of seaworthy. So they're all broken. And like us, we're broken to some extent. There's some guys with PTSD. We all have our own issues. Yesterday, myself and Lee coined the phrase, fixing blokes in broken boats. So yeah, that's the unofficial paddle group.
The unofficial one.
Yeah.
I think Churchill would have approved of if you're going through hell, keep paddling. So I think that amended quote's quite nice. And I really hope that you enjoy your green reset, as you call it. And thank you for a very special morning, Chris, and for keeping my hair dry and me out of those murky waters of the Thames, because they're not too clean, are they, out there?
I know.
We stayed dry, didn't we?
Yeah, it was good. It was a really good morning. Yeah, it was a pleasure to have you on board.
Well, it was a privilege to be on board. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks very much.
Former Royal Marine Lee Waters helped Chris form the paddle group with my contact behind the scenes who made all this happen for me today, Joe Maynard. Lee, great to see you. It was fantastic seeing you out on the water from my vantage point in my Klepper. Tell me in your words what the paddle group does.
When you leave the Royal Marines, you get ground rush, and suddenly overnight you're no longer part of this crazy bunch of lads that never grow up. We call ourselves the Lost Boys out of Peter Pan, dressed in green, and we never grow up. And people go off to every corner of the globe and chase the Yankee dollar and suddenly realise the thing they're missing the most is getting seen off together in bad weather in the field. So we formed the paddle group. Myself and Joe paddled the Normandy 75, paddled the English sector, and we just come up with this great idea of getting blokes into folding boats on expeditions. I'm an advanced sea kite guide myself, so I do that as a job now since leaving the Royal Marines. So with my oversight, making sure everything's safe, we approached Phil from the RMA to form the paddle group officially within the Royal Marines Association. And now we're getting people joining and coming on expedition. We had a guy on the first exped, had been out the Royal Marines 10 years, was in a bad place. He'd missed all his mates, missed the job, missed the camaraderie, and suddenly overnight he's in Scotland, well, in October in the winter, rain parallel in his face, but big smile on his face, drinking wobbly wets with his muckers again. And he said, this is what I've been missing for the past 10 years.
What are wobbly wets?
A wobbly wet is where you have a coffee or a tea, preferably a coffee, with a bit of whiskey in it.
I like the sound of wobbly. Actually, I like the sound of wobbly wet. That's what we should be drinking now, really, isn't it? After paddling up the Thames of wobbly.
A bit like an Irish coffee.
Yeah, sounds good. I like that. I'm going to take that away with me. But also, it's not just about the Marines. The paddling is across all three services, isn't it?
Absolutely. The good thing about the Royal Marines, I mean, I got wounded in my time in the Royal Marines and ended up in Hasler Company, which is the Royal Navy Rehabilitation Centre. And at the time, it was formed by the Royal Marines to help lads who were getting injured on the Herrick cycles in Afghanistan. But we had an equal number of Royal Air Force, Royal Navy and Army personnel down there because all three services were strapped medically. And we were there to help the other cap badges. And the Royal Marines have always done that. It's never been a case of, this is just for us, you're not welcome. We've always opened our doors, and we did the same with the paddle group. On the last commando paddle in Scotland, we had an RAF regiment guy who's commando trained. He come with us. We've yet to get someone from the Royal Navy brave a winter paddle with us, but we're hoping that will change in the future.
I'm sure it will. And it really does provide an essential lifeline for serving personnel and veterans, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
What is mental health like across the HM forces?
I'm not going to lie to you, it's in a bad place. I struggled in the end of my career. My career was cut short because of the things that I experienced, and I had a really dark period in my life. And the help from Hasler Company, the help from my friends and family and my fiancée Kira, I've come through the other side of it. And paddling was my go-to self-healing event because it got me outside. It's a physical activity. It's a challenge. There's elements of danger because we're all self-admitted dopamine addicts. We're addicted to adrenaline. And if we don't replace something with a similar activity where there's danger involved, we become very agitated and naughty children at home. And our wives and girlfriends don't tolerate us. They actually prefer it if we go out regularly and burn off that energy. And as soon as I discovered kayaking, I realised this was for me.
I gather you wanted to be a bootneck, Lee, from the age of about 5, and that you were inspired by your grandfather. Tell me about your grandfather.
My granddad, Leslie Waters, he was a Royal Marine butcher and served all the way through World War II. Did 15 years in the Royal Marines in total. I used to go ferreting with me Jack Russells, walk up the hill, and then on the way back, stop in to see my nan and granddad. And he'd be stood at the door, almost to attention, and call me Royal. Then when I joined the Royal Marines, he was at my King Squad, the proudest man on the parade there that day. And every time I used to go and visit my nan and pap on leave, I'd end up splicing the main brace, which is a Royal Navy, Royal Marine tradition, fixing the main line on the old wooden ships. And it was the most dangerous job to splice the manila on top of that. So they'd get a double tot of rum. My granddad was a Royal Marine butcher in World War II, so probably the most important person on board ship. He dished up the rum top during time of war. And I'd go and visit him on leave and end up turning myself inside out, drinking rum with my granddad, and he could still drink it in his 70s.
Did he fill your head with stories from his
absolutely.
days? What story do you particularly remember him?
He was a pom-pom gunner on HMS Penelope in the Mediterranean, protecting Malta. So if Malta had fallen, we'd never have been able to take back North Africa. And the Admiralty decided to pull the Navy out of Malta and move them back to Gibraltar, and his ship got hit by a Luftwaffe raid and had to limp back into dry dock in Malta, and she was the only ship there for 3 months getting repairs, getting attacked by upwards of 500 sorties a day, attacking this one ship. They were hell-bent on destroying it. And there's a famous photograph that's in the Imperial War Museum. My granddad took me up to see when I was a child, and it's the ship, and my granddad's on the side, hanging over the side with all the rest of the crew, pointing himself out to me. Hundreds of wooden wedges sticking out where they had to put wooden wedges in to stop it sinking. They then limped to Gibraltar, had the wedges replaced with little welds, and then they sailed across to New York for a full refit. And my granddad then left that ship to go on board HMS Nelson. And 6 months later, Penelope was hit by a torpedo off Anzio and went down with all its crew.
Oh my goodness.
And he had several close scrapes like that throughout the war.
So your head was full of all these stories growing up. And you served just over 20 years. And you had a really active operational career all over the world, didn't you, Lee?
Yeah, I went mountain leader, and the phrase, be careful what you wish for. In the early days when I joined the Royal Marines, we just did the occasional island tour, Mediterranean tour and a Caribbean tour, and lots of wandering patrol, doing guard duties at camp. And then suddenly, after the Twin Towers, the world just went crazy, and we just found ourselves back-to-back tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. So lost a lot of good friends. I nearly copped it on my last tour. Only 3 weeks in, I got shot 3 times, leading a patrol. And then 2 months later, my personal good friend, John White, who's my boss, he got blown up and lost 3 limbs. And we were going to do the Devizes to Westminster kayak race together. And a year later, he rang me up to say, I'm still doing it. And we did the Devizes to Westminster canoe race together. And he had a prosthetic arm, and we smashed the race. It's 127 miles long, 76 portages where you got to get out. And he walked along and I put the boat on a trailer, and we did it in 28 hours.
Wow,
not too
that's
bad.
Amazing. That's not too shabby, is it?
We got invited by Blesma to come and do the Golden Jubilee, and that's when I sat in a sea kayak and realised this is the direction I want to take. I want one of these. The ability to fill it up, go away for a few days, and get away from what I referred to as the white noise, which is society. Just lots of noises and lots of people that don't understand you and understand what you've gone through, and that's what a lot of lads are suffering with right now, is the inability to blend in with society. And that was my healing tool, jumping in a kayak and just sitting there in the middle of the ocean, and suddenly a dolphin jumps up beside you and you realise, actually, life's not that bad.
Yeah, I could feel it. I said it to Chris as soon as I got into the Klepper, and we were out on the water and you were shouting some instructions to us, and I felt part of your team straight away. And
Awesome.
You feel that healing sort of sensation of the movement of the water, and you're in nature. It was sunny this morning. People were waving at us. It made me feel good,
Yeah.
just dipping into your kind of world.
I call that the metronome.
The metronome.
For mental health, there's a technique that they use called eye movement desensitization rehabilitation, where they get you to concentrate on the fingers going backwards and forwards like a metronome, and then you talk over the things that are affecting you the most. And your brain, after a while, says, I can't concentrate on the fingers and talk about this at the same time. So it changes the image in your brain and your memory becomes different. Kayaking does the same thing. I take people out quite often that are suffering from mental health, and after a few minutes, they're smiling and laughing and joking because their brain has said, you've got to concentrate on staying upright, paddling, looking where you're going. So it stops focusing on the thing that's hurting them. They're concentrating on the here and now.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Just reading, you just sent me some notes about your career. You went to 45 countries, from Norway to India, the Himalayas, across the USA, around the Caribbean, Europe, the Mediterranean and Africa, and you served in 42 Commando 2. You had several major incidents, which I was quite taken aback when I read them on your email. In fact, so taken aback, I actually printed them out to bring today because I really couldn't believe it. You kind of made nothing of them, but will you tell me about those 3 things that happened to you that really did change your life and have earned you the title Lucky Lee, I think?
Yeah. First one was falling down the Kerez, which is an ancient biblical irrigation system in the desert in Afghanistan. They dig down to the water table and then dig a tunnel along the water table all the way back to their villages. And that's the way they get water in the desert. But there's no health and safety executive in Afghanistan, so these things are left wide open. Some of them are big enough to drive into with the entire Land Rover. We actually did have one vehicle go down one on Herrick 5, yeah. It was only the .5 machine gun that stopped him going all the way to the bomb. It just dug into the side and it was stuck, hanging. I was on a day patrol to Nowzad and the rain season kicked in and we lost a few vehicles in flash floods. And we had to drive back that night, and I warned our commander against driving back so we didn't have IRT cover because it was a new moon.
What's IRT cover
So
then?
instant response team.
So you're Chinook?
Yeah,
your
later
medical
called
team.
MERT, Medical and Instant Response Team. They can't fly unless there's decent millilux levels for their night vision. So we would have been alone. Like a lot of things that happened in my career, I was the whistleblower and the warner. I ended up the one getting injured. We got stuck and I thought it was a boulder underneath the vehicle. So I said to my driver, just put the handbrake on. I then jumped out the Wimmick, expecting to land on the sand, and just disappeared 50 foot into the earth. Broke my back in 3 places, fractured my face in 3 places, I had a night vision goggle on, lost several fingernails falling down this thing because it got narrower. It was like a well. All the skin off my kneecaps, all my equipment was stripped off me apart from my pistol, which was on like a lanyard attached to me. And I came to, I was in a foot of water. It knocked me out when I hit the bottom. I didn't realise the pain in my back at this point because the Taliban were using these systems to infiltrate from village to village. So my immediate thought was, I need to get out of here. So I started climbing back up and then felt the familiar feeling of a Land Rover toast drop. The lads had passed them down, tied 2 together because they're 25 feet long each. That's how we knew that it was 50 foot, because they had to tie a third one for it to reach me. And I just tied that around me and they hauled me up. I spent the night in the back of a Pinsgauer in the storm in crippling pain, and then straight into sick bay the next morning, flown back to UK. Spent 2 months back in UK recovering, undiagnosed broken back, and then went back out and finished the last 3 months of the tour.
With an undiagnosed broken back?
Undiagnosed broken back.
Wow.
And that obviously had a knock-on effect with my health, because the following year I noticed I couldn't run properly and it was affecting my bladder and all sorts, and they sent me to sick bay, and it was the spinal cord was being squeezed by the broken vertebrae. So that was the first time I went into quite significant rehab. Then back into the Corps, anger issues like a lot of people. Continued on with my job, display team for a little while, and then went to 40 Commando to go on Herrick 12. And 3 weeks into that tour, a horrible tour, we lost 75 people from the battle group in total, 14 from 40 Commando. I lost 2 really good friends on that tour. And I was on a patrol leading my multiple, and I broke Murphy's Law. And you've heard of Murphy's Law, several rules that you need to stick by in combat. We noticed a lot of movement, a lot of atmospherics that tells us straight away there's some bad people and something's going to happen. And I needed to warn this omelette call sign that were with the Afghan National Army that were going straight into an ambush. And they asked me to say what compound I'd seen this movement in. I got my map out, and as soon as I got my map out, I got shot. And the first round went through the map and into my face. I just happened to look around the map as I looked at the compound number, and as I looked around, it went through. I've still got the map, hole straight through the middle. Hit me there on the face, knocked me clean out. I came to, and I can remember my troop sergeant in training saying, because he was shot 3 times in his career, he said, when it hits the fan, training kicks in. And it absolutely did. It went from that slow motion, like Saving Private Ryan when they're on the beach, and all of a sudden it just sped up quickly, and I was back in the here and now, straight on the pressel switch, and shouted contact, weight out over the net, and started crawling back into cover. And as I was crawling, my rifle had been knocked off of me but was still on the sling, and I reached out my left hand to grab it, shot through the left hand, and my hand hit me in the face.
Oh.
Made me angry, and all I did was stick my 2 fingers up to the bloke that was shooting at me and told him to go away in no uncertain terms. And I rolled into a bit of cover, and as I rolled in, he got me in the left foot.
Oh, no.
So it was a bad day in the office, but...
You got some survivor's guilt, didn't you?
Absolutely. I was 3 weeks into a tour. I'd just been training. Recce Troop, who I was with, me and the boss had been training him for 2 years solid. And suddenly I'm leaving my lads. We're like family. I'm not a troop. We're absolutely family. And I'm taking off, looking down at them like Charlie Sheen in Platoon, saying, war is over for me now. Just racked with survivor's guilt, looking away and crying and thinking... And then just waiting for the phone call to hear one by one people getting hit. Luckily, we didn't lose anyone in my troop, but John White got blown up and lost 3 limbs, bless him. One other lad got shot through the arm, but we were very, very lucky. They were so well trained that, and it stood out in that unit. But there are other people, too many other good lads that died in that unit, full stop, that I knew very well. And I'm just sat at home doing physio, just watching the news, and it's the worst place in the world to be.
I'm sure it is, but you said that paddling, you feel now, has given you your identity back.
I was a Royal Marine Mountain leader. Our role within brigade in wider defence is to train people to survive, fight and operate in cold weather and mountainous environments. And I love that job. I was passionate about that job. Training people up to a standard that they can live and operate in that nasty environment. And being out in front and training people, that's what I'd known for the better part of 16 years in brigade. Suddenly I'd lost my identity because I was no longer able to do that, and I was looking at medical discharge. Well, I wasn't looking at medical discharge at this stage. I was recovering, but was then sent down to Lympstone as part of the ML staff to train the next lot of MLs and recce operators. And it was whilst I was there that, you may have heard the phrase, fell off the wagon. I was a functioning alcoholic, like a lot of people become. I was self-medicating just by trying to hide the pain by drinking, and it doesn't work. It comes a point where something gives, and I'd gone through a messy divorce, like a lot of us, and I just felt like everything was jumbled. Nothing made sense in my brain, and nothing made sense in my life. And then a good friend of mine who was in charge of me and took over the wing, he made the decision for me to go down to the Hasler company to get rehab. He said, look, get yourself fixed and come back, or get yourself fixed and go off to Civvy Street. Either way, it's breaking my heart seeing you the way you are. You're not the Lee that I know. So I was a very loud character in the Corps. That's very much known. And then it was obvious that I wasn't functioning. I was suffering. And at that time, whilst I was at Lympstone, I was charged with developing the urban climbing capability within the Mountain Leader spec. Basically climbing buildings. We were coming up to London and climbing all sorts of buildings with Met Police and just thrashing out all techniques. And I was on Cope Hill Down doing an exercise, and we had a catastrophic failure of the equipment. I only fell 15 feet, but broke both my scaphoids, both wrists, and my sacrum at the base of my back. Spent a week in hospital, and then 3 months recovering, still running courses, but with both arms in plaster casts. Because there's no one else to take my role. And then after that, it was decided, time's up.
But you found a new purpose, and
Paddling.
And it's really helped.
Oh, absolutely. I used
bring you back to the man you perhaps were before all these things happened.
I lived in the vertical realm before, climbing and skiing as a mountain leader. And I haven't climbed or skied since I had that urban climbing accident. I went from vertical to horizontal. I'm in a sea kayak on the sea. Still get that rush of danger when you're on a big surf swell day, but I get an absolute buzz out of training. I've just been up in 4-5 Commando taking a load of serving lads on adventure training, and it feels like I'm still in the Royal Marines.
And I bet you're looking forward to the trip to France.
Yeah, can't wait.
Yeah. What's it like when you're actually out on the sea in those little Kleppers?
They're really stable. You found that yourself. If you were in a single sea kayak, you would have capsized in some of those bits of surface chop that went past caused by the wake of the boats. But in Kleppers, they're very stable. Yeah, it's a delivery platform that the modern day special forces still use to this day. You can load them up and the good thing about them, they're expeditionary. You don't have to have a roof rack. You can just throw them in the back of a van once they're folded down.
Fantastic. Well, listen, I hope you have a wonderful trip. And I'm really glad that you found something really special to help you cope with some of the things that you went through. I mean, my eyes just widened when I read your original email. It's extraordinary. And I'm glad that you're well and that you're happy. And it was a real treat to be out with you and the team. So thank you.
No, it's a treat for us as well. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Seeing Chris Lee and the rest of the group off in Portsmouth will be Royal Marines Charity Membership Operations Director and former Corps Regimental Sergeant Major Phil Gilby. Phil, bonjour, because you are looking after the French side of this expedition. Tell me a bit more about what the group's going to be doing over there and what you'll be doing in France.
We've got a fantastic event planned for them all. I'll be seeing the paddle group off in Portsmouth on the 3rd. I then make my way across to Normandy ahead of the main group, which is leaving on the 5th. The largest group we've ever taken to Normandy for the 80th anniversary. We'll probably be about 300 in total, including the serving Marines that are going over on the trip, including one D-Day veteran, Norman Stanley Ashford, known as Grandad to the RMA. He's 99, 100 this year, and he'll be the only D-Day veteran that's in our group. He was a landing craftsman in Normandy on D-Day, and he did numerous runs into Gold Beach on the main assault. Been a couple of times with us. He's looking forward to it, and he's desperate that he'll make it for the 80th anniversary.
Gosh, what's it like when you have time to sit down with him and listen to some of his stories, Phil?
Oh, it's amazing. It's absolutely fantastic. And the unique thing this year with 47 Commando, which is our landing craft unit supporting the event as well, he's going to have the opportunity to go on some of the landing craft that we're using today and meet some of the LC's landing craftsmen of today. So his stories are fantastic. He's a very modest man, but once you get him talking, the stories are absolutely fantastic.
Can you share one of those stories with us, with perhaps some of his memories?
As I said, he's quite a modest man, so to get the story out of him, it's quite a push. So once you do get him talking, the Normandy assault itself, he talks about that with great passion, memories, loss, happiness, every emotion going. They went through the Normandy campaign, so that highlights quite a lot when he's telling his story.
How significant is it for you that you're doing this and you're part of this? I would imagine it's quite an emotional trip.
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. So the 80th anniversary will probably be the last time any veterans of D-Day are there. So part of my role in what I do with the Royal Marines Association is keeping that story alive. We put these trips on annually. This is the biggest one we've done so far, getting the younger cohort of Royal Marines and their families involved, and getting the families, especially of the 47 Commando veterans, which there are no longer any veterans, but taking them across as well to keep the story alive for them. And that's something that we'll do with every conflict that the Royal Marines have been involved with over the years.
And how do you, perhaps when you're speaking to younger people, school children, perhaps sometimes, I don't know if you talk to school kids sometimes, but how do you explain what happened on those beaches back on D-Day? So
with our trip itself, we'll relive a lot of the story of 47 Commando itself. So part of the trip is we base ourselves out of Port-en-Bessin, which is where 47 liberated on D-Day. And on the 6th, we'll go to the beach where 47 Commando landed, and the paddle group will be involved in coming ashore, along with landing craft from 47 Commando. And we've got tour guides. They'll be telling the story, the actual story of what happened on the day. From there, the ones that are able will reenact the 12-mile insertion march into Port-en-Bessin, where 47 Commando liberated. The paddle sports will be doing the coastline at that point as well. And then those that are unable will go to Bayeux Cemetery and lay a wreath on behalf of all the Royal Marines that sadly lost their lives on D-Day. And then the 7th will be the liberation of Port-en-Bessin Day, where along with the town, where the Royal Marines are very warmly welcomed, and we do a service on the western feature, a feature that was key to liberating Port-en-Bessin. We then move across to the eastern feature, where Captain Cousins of 47 Commando sadly lost his life assaulting that position. And then we move down into the harbour area, where the fuel line was actually coming in to refuel the advance for D-Day. And that was all key points that 47 Commando had to liberate. And we tell the story as we move to each of those locations to keep that whole story alive.
That's incredible. There's a lot of laughter going on here, but it is because we're on HMS Belfast, probably with a lot of your colleagues. So it's nice to hear them laughing in the background. And of course, HMS Belfast, this magnificent naval warship, which I feel rather ashamed I've never visited, and I've lived in London more than 30 years. I'm definitely going to correct that. Played a significant role too on D-Day, didn't she?
No, that's correct. So I think HMS Belfast was the first ship to fire on D-Day to launch the assault of the troops.
So did she offer protection to the troops that were landing by firing?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, and of course Winston Churchill wanted to be aboard Belfast, and I think was talked out of it by King George VI, who said, if you go, I have to go, and then that's too dangerous to have us both on board.
A wise decision.
It was a very wise decision, I think. What have been the main challenges for you in organising all of this? Because it sounds fairly complex stuff.
It is complex stuff, and the 5-year anniversary is the 75th was exactly the same. The 80th is the same. Because of all the dignitaries that come and commemorate D-Day, the French basically put the whole of the Normandy coastline in lockdown, so it makes movement quite complicated. But on top of that, it's always a complicated evolution because the age group that we're taking over there, on the 75th, our youngest person was 13, our eldest person was 98. So keeping that cohort of age groups content is is always a challenge. The age group that we take is generally an older clientele. Former Royal Marines who still think they're 17 is normally a challenge.
They don't grow up, do they? I think it was Lee or Chris says that they're like Peter Pan. If you've been a Green Beret, you always stay young. You'll also be reenacting the Bordeaux phase of Operation Frankton, I think, which was made famous by the Cockleshell heroes. Just remind those of us listening what Frankton was all about.
So the Cockleshell heroes was a paddle up the Gironde, and it was to basically put limpet mines on the ships that were harboured up in Bordeaux. And the paddle group, they're here today. That's something that they're actually going to reenact on HMS Belfast today, which is the launch of their D-Day campaign to raise funds for RMA, the Royal Marines charity.
I would imagine, Phil, that you've seen firsthand the impact the paddle group has had on veterans and serving personnel, and including Lee, who I think you trained Lee, didn't you?
That's correct. I was actually his true physical training instructor when he went through training.
Yeah, it really does seem like it's been life-changing for a lot of people. What changes have you seen in people who have discovered the paddle group?
Part of my role is running the membership strand of RMA, the Royal Marines charity, so the Royal Marines Association. And we've formed lots of groups, the paddle group being one of them. We've got a rugby branch, football branch, golf branch, and it's to keep like-minded people together. So like-minded people in the same place doing something that they enjoy. One, it's excellent for camaraderie, but if they're actually struggling, there's a good chance they'll open up at that point. With mental health is a good example. Talk to their colleagues, which is always a good form of therapy. From that, if they are struggling, they're highlighted and we can get the assistance to them. So part of that whole thing is keeping people together and just making sure they're not alone.
You're Royal Marines through and through. You joined when you were 16, when you were just a lad. What appealed to you as that 16-year-old lad?
The Royal Marines was something I always wanted to do, and that stemmed from my granddad, who's a World War II veteran. He was in the Royal Navy, and I was quite active as a young child. And he said, you don't want to follow me into the Navy, you're more suited to the Marines. And that was it. And that's all I ever wanted to do all the way through. And at the first opportunity at 16, I started my journey into the Corps.
A journey that's being followed by one of your sons, I gather.
That's correct. He joined at 16. He's been in 12 years now. He's actually deployed at this present moment in time. He went away in the end of January and he's due back beginning of July.
And do you feel a great sense of pride that he's followed in your footsteps? Or is sometimes there a bit of nervousness?
A massive sense of pride. As a parent, there's always a little bit of nervousness, especially when you know what I know and how things operate. But, I'd be lying if I said you're not nervous when he's deployed. And you just obviously wish him and everyone that's deployed a safe return.
And for you, Phil, what is the bit you're most looking forward to about this big trip you're about to embark on?
Just getting all those Royal Marines, out there on the 80th anniversary of the operation, getting all those people in the same place on that anniversary to commemorate and celebrate the actions of our brave troops and to commemorate those people who we lost on that operation. Just getting those people together on that day will be just a magnificent event. Well,
listen, I wish you luck with that magnificent event. And can people follow you on socials? Will there be some social media content?
Yes, there will, all over the RMA, the Royal Marines charity channels. We'll be publicising everything that's going on, so it will definitely be out there.
Well, I hope you have a fantastic time. You have been listening to Lee Waters and Chris Maynard, who are making final preparations to cross the Channel with 16 or so Royal Marine colleagues to reenact some of the key moments of the D-Day landings, which of course took place 80 years ago this week. And to Phil Gilby, who's masterminding everything in France and is our third guest of our special podcast this week. I've had a great time with the paddle group, being on a Klepper with Chris and hearing about the vital support the group provides for serving personnel and veterans. It's been humbling to hear the difference paddling and being back in the Marines world makes mental health-wise to those in a lonely kind of limbo between serving and civvy street, and to people like Lee, who was badly injured and found himself in a difficult place in his mind. Download our series at convex.podbean.com or search the Convex Conversation on Spotify, Apple or wherever you listen to yours. I'll be back on dry land next week. Join me then.